April 8, 2009, started as an ordinary Wednesday in Woodstock, Ontario, a small, friendly city about 130 kilometers southwest of Toronto, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and kids walked home from school without a second thought. The sun was shining that afternoon, casting long shadows across the pavement as children poured out of Oliver Stevens Public School, their backpacks bouncing, their voices carrying that particular pitch of freedom that only comes at the end of a school day. For 8-year-old Victoria Elizabeth Marie Stafford, everyone called her Tori, this Wednesday was supposed to be special for a different reason entirely. Her mother had recently moved into a new place, and for the very first time, Tori was going to walk there all by herself. It was a milestone, a small gesture of growing independence that her mother had finally agreed to. Tori was excited, maybe a little nervous, but mostly proud. She had no way of knowing that she would never make it home. Tori was a bright, energetic third grader with a smile that could light up a room. She had long brown hair, often pulled back with a headband, and on that particular day, she wore a Hannah Montana t-shirt, her favorite, and butterfly earrings that caught the light when she turned her head. She loved her older brother Darren more than anything in the world. The two of them were inseparable, only 3 years apart in age, and they spent nearly every moment together when they weren't at school. They argued sometimes, the way siblings do, but they always made up. They took turns coming up with ideas for what to do next, building forts, playing games, making each other laugh until their sides hurt. Darren usually walked his little sister home from school, a protective routine that had become second nature to both of them. But that day, Darren had been kept after school for an activity, and Tori's mother had given permission for her daughter to walk alone. It was 3:32 in the afternoon when a surveillance camera positioned near the school captured something that would soon become one of the most haunting pieces of footage in Canadian criminal history. The grainy black and white video showed Tori walking northbound on Fife Avenue, and she wasn't alone. Beside her was a young woman with a black ponytail, described as white, somewhere between 19 and 25 years old, about 5'2" and roughly 125 pounds. In the footage, Tori didn't appear to be struggling. She wasn't crying or trying to pull away. To anyone watching, it looked like a child walking with someone she trusted, maybe an older sister or a family friend. The two of them were talking, and then they walked out of the camera's view, heading toward a retirement home parking lot. That was the last confirmed sighting of Tori Stafford alive. When Tori didn't arrive at her mother's new apartment by 4, Tara McDonald felt the first flicker of worry. It wasn't like Tori to be late, especially not on a day when she was so excited about this new responsibility. Tara called Rodney Stafford, her ex-husband and Tori's father, hoping maybe the little girl had gotten confused and gone to his place instead. But Rodney hadn't seen her either. The worry escalated quickly from a flutter to a full-blown panic. By early evening, both parents were frantically calling everyone they knew, checking with friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen their daughter. When those calls turned up nothing, they contacted the Woodstock Police Service. A missing person report was filed, and suddenly the machinery of law enforcement began to turn. In those first hours, there was still hope. Kids wandered off sometimes, got distracted, lost track of time. Maybe Tori had gone to a friend's house and lost track of time. Maybe she'd gotten turned around and was sitting somewhere safe, waiting to be found. The community mobilized immediately. Woodstock was the kind of town where people looked out for one another, where tragedy was something that happened elsewhere on the news to other families. Volunteers combed through neighborhoods, calling Tori's name. Flyers with her picture, that bright smile, those butterfly earrings, were printed and distributed to every business, every street corner, every community board. The Woodstock Fire Department even deployed a rescue boat to search local waterways, hopping against hope that this was just a terrible accident, not something more sinister. But as the hours stretched into days, hope began to curdle into something darker. On April 10, 2 days after Tori vanished, the police released the surveillance footage to the public. They appealed for the woman in the video to come forward, describing her clothing, her appearance, asking anyone who recognized her to contact authorities immediately. The response was overwhelming. Tips poured in from across the country, thousands of them, each one needing to be investigated, cross-referenced, ruled out. Tori's grandparents offered a $10,000 reward for her safe return. The story spread beyond Woodstock, beyond Ontario, rippling outward until it became a national obsession. On April 15, America's Most Wanted featured Tori's case as its top story, broadcasting her face to millions of viewers across North America. In any missing child case, investigators follow a grim but necessary protocol. They look at the family first. Statistics show that when a child disappears, it's often someone close to them who's responsible. Tara McDonald and Rodney Stafford both understood this, and over that first weekend, both of them voluntarily submitted to lie detector tests. Both passed. But understanding the necessity of the investigation didn't make it any less painful, any less humiliating to be treated as potential suspects in your own child's disappearance. Tara and Rodney's relationship had always been complicated. They'd married young. Tara was only 17, and had their son Darren a couple of years later. When Tori was born on July 15, 2000, it seemed like maybe they'd found their footing as a family. But the marriage didn't last. They separated when Tori was about 2.5 years old, and the years that followed had been marked by the usual struggles of co-parenting after a difficult split. Rodney was honest about not always being present in his children's lives, a fact that haunted him now. Tara had her own struggles to battle. She'd begun using OxyContin in 2005, and though she was attending a methadone clinic by the time of Tori's disappearance, she admitted to still using the prescription painkiller. In fact, she acknowledged that she had taken OxyContin on the very day Tori went missing. It wasn't until about 6 months before Rafferty's trial in 2012 that she finally became completely clean. As the media coverage intensified, so did the scrutiny on both parents. On May 15, exactly 5 weeks after Tori vanished, the strain became too much. During a daily media conference that had become a ritual of public grief, Rodney lashed out at Tara, accusing her of displaying a lack of emotion, suggesting she was able to maintain composure because she wasn't as invested. Tara fired back, pointing out that Rodney could cry for the cameras because he felt guilty about being an absentee father. It was ugly, raw, the kind of breakdown that happens when two people are being crushed under unimaginable pressure and can't find any other outlet for the rage and helplessness. The public watched, some with sympathy, others with judgment, as this family's most private pain played out on television screens across the nation. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that Tori's disappearance might be connected to a drug debt, that maybe someone from Tara's past had taken the child as collateral or revenge. Tara addressed these suspicions directly, speaking in painful detail about her ongoing struggle with addiction and emphasizing that there was no drug debt, no connection to her daughter's vanishing. Still, the whispers persisted. On May 18, family members and supporters walked in the Victoria Day parade in Woodstock, a show of solidarity and hope that Tori might still be found alive. The community wore purple, Tori's favorite color, and carried signs with her picture. But privately, many were beginning to accept what they didn't want to believe, that this beautiful little girl was probably never coming home. On May 20, 2009, 42 days after Tori disappeared, the Ontario Provincial Police made 2 arrests that would finally provide some answers, even if those answers were far more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Michael Thomas Christopher Stephen Rafferty, a 28-year-old man from Woodstock, was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Terri-Lynne McClintic, an 18-year-old woman, was initially charged with being an accessory to murder, along with lesser charges. The woman in the surveillance video had been identified. The revelation that followed was particularly gut-wrenching. Tara McDonald was familiar with Terri-Lynne McClintic. Not well, but she knew her. Tara and her boyfriend had twice visited McClintic's home to purchase OxyContin. It wasn't a stranger who had taken Tori. It was someone who had likely seen the little girl before, who might have even spoken to her family. Within days of her arrest, McClintic made a decision that would shape the entire case. Through her lawyer, she indicated that she wanted to help find Tori's body. Her attorney released a statement saying that his client wants Tori's family to know she is trying hard to find her body. It was an implicit admission that Tori was dead, confirmation of what many had feared but no one wanted to accept. For 2 months after the arrests, the question remained: where was Tori? Detective Inspector Jim Smythe, a veteran investigator with the Ontario Provincial Police, had become one of the lead investigators on the case. He was methodical, patient, the kind of detective who believed in following every lead, no matter how small. In mid-July, Smythe learned a crucial piece of information. On the evening of April 8, 2009, the day Tori was taken, Michael Rafferty's cell phone had pinged off a tower near Mount Forest, Ontario, a rural area about 130 kilometers northwest of Toronto. On July 19, 2009, Smythe decided to drive through that rural area himself, just to get a sense of the landscape, to see what was there. It was the kind of instinct that separates good detectives from great ones, the willingness to trust a hunch, to put in the legwork even when there's no guarantee of results. As he drove along the back roads near Mount Forest, Smythe saw something that made him stop. There was a house, almost identical to a house that McClintic had described during her interviews with police. He got out of his car and began searching the area on foot. About 500 meters off concession number 6, just east of Mount Forest, Detective Smythe found a secluded country field. Near a pine tree, there was a pile of rocks that looked deliberately arranged. Something about it felt wrong, felt purposeful. He began moving the rocks, one by one, and underneath, he found what he'd been looking for and dreading all at once. On July 21, 2009, the Ontario Provincial Police confirmed that human remains found in that secluded field had been positively identified as those of Victoria Stafford. She had been there for more than 3 months, hidden under that rock pile, while her family searched and prayed and held on to hope. A forensic pathologist examined the remains and determined the cause of death: multiple blunt force trauma to the head from repeated hammer blows. The autopsy also revealed that Tori had suffered a severe beating that caused lacerations to her liver, numerous rib fractures, and internal bleeding. Portions of Tori's clothing were recovered from the site: her headband, her Hannah Montana t-shirt, her butterfly earrings. The little girl who had walked out of school on a sunny April afternoon, excited about her newfound independence, had been brutally murdered and discarded like trash. Tara McDonald had already been through the unimaginable. Now, she had to plan her 8-year-old daughter's funeral. To understand how an 8-year-old girl could be lured away in broad daylight, we need to understand Terri-Lynne McClintic. At 18 years old, McClintic was young, troubled, and deeply damaged by years of instability. She'd been using drugs heavily around the time of Tori's abduction, substances that clouded judgment and lowered inhibitions. But drugs don't make someone a killer. There was something else in McClintic, something broken in a way that allowed her to do the unthinkable. McClintic's early life reads like a catalog of trauma and violence. Her birth mother was a stripper who gave her up to a fellow stripper, Carol McClintic. Terri-Lynne grew up shuttled between 8 different communities, bouncing from her adoptive mother's home to foster care and back again. Violence was prevalent, as were Carol McClintic's drinking and drug habits. Terri-Lynne started using marijuana at age 8 and would go on to consume cocaine, ecstasy, morphine, and OxyContin throughout her formative years. Her first brush with police came at age 10 when she stole toys from a hardware store. At 11, she went into foster care after reporting that her mother had been physically and verbally abusing her daily for 2 years. When she was 12, her mother's boyfriend threatened to slit her throat. The violence only escalated as she grew older. As a child, She microwaved a dog until it screamed and had to be put down. At 15, she punched her mother in the face so hard that she fractured Carol McClintic's cheekbone. Over the following years, she racked up multiple assault charges, including kicking someone in the head while they were on the ground and stabbing a man in the back during a mugging. Perhaps most disturbing were the letters McClintic wrote while in youth detention, letters that revealed increasingly dark torture fantasies. "I just wanna be on road and take the first person I see, grab him, bring him with me, and mutilate the expletive out of them, smash their skull apart then piece it together like a puzzle that way, stay conscious of the pain I'm inflicting on him," she wrote in March 2008, just over a year before Tori's death. On February 4, 2009, just 2 months before Tori was taken, McClintic met Michael Rafferty in a chance encounter at a pizza shop in Woodstock. It should have been a forgettable moment, two strangers crossing paths, but instead it became the beginning of a nightmare. Rafferty was 28, 10 years older than McClintic, and he called her a pretty little number. They had intimate relations in his car that same day. Rafferty choked her during the encounter, a pattern that would define their twisted relationship. Within weeks, they were involved in what could loosely be called a relationship, if you could call something fueled by drugs and increasingly dark fantasies a relationship. According to testimony that would later emerge at trial, the two of them had discussed taking a child. McClintic would later tell the court, "I didn't wake up that morning thinking I was going to take a child." But the seed had been planted, the idea had been discussed, and on April 8, when McClintic saw Tori walking alone after school, she made a choice. Surveillance footage captured what happened next, but it couldn't capture the words exchanged. McClintic later described that conversation to the court. She introduced herself as T to Tori. The young girl shared that her name was Victoria, but everyone called her Tori. McClintic asked if Tori liked dogs. Of course she did. What 8-year-old doesn't? McClintic told her she had a Shih Tzu named Precious. Would Tori like to see the dog? It was such a simple lie, so devastatingly effective. Tori wanted to see the dog. Another witness, Laura Perry, whose son was in Tori's 3rd grade class, observed the moment. She watched as Tori hurriedly left the school grounds with this young woman she didn't recognize. Something about it felt off, unsettling, but not quite enough to intervene. By the time Laura Perry processed what she'd seen, Tori and McClintic had already walked out of view, heading toward the Carcent Care retirement home parking lot. There in that parking lot, a dark-colored vehicle was waiting. The car had distinctive black rims and tinted rear windows. Detective Constable Brockenier would later piece together video footage from multiple cameras showing this vehicle driving past Oliver Stevens School around 3:05 p.m., then entering a nearby Esso station about 15 minutes later, and finally pulling into the retirement home parking lot shortly after 3:30 p.m. Behind the wheel was Michael Rafferty. McClintic pushed Tori into the back seat. Rafferty yelled at her to hurry, to hurry, to hurry. If the entire abduction was timed correctly based on the video footage, it took less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes for a child's life to end, for a family to be destroyed, for a community to be shattered. What happened next is almost too painful to recount, but it must be told because Tori deserves to be remembered, and her suffering cannot be erased or minimized. As Rafferty drove away from Woodstock, Tori asked several times where they were going. McClintic kept telling her they were just going for a drive, though she would later testify that she, too, didn't know exactly where Rafferty was taking them. On Rafferty's instruction, McClintic placed a black pea coat over Tori, covering the little girl as she crouched on the floor behind the driver's seat. At one point, when Rafferty stopped at a coffee shop, McClintic testified that she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," to Tori. They drove to Guelph, a city about 50 kilometers north of Woodstock. Rafferty stopped at the home of one of his friends briefly, then continued to a Home Depot at the north end of the city. McClintic went into the store alone. She purchased a claw hammer and garbage bags with cash that Rafferty had given her. She was instructed to buy these items, she would later tell the court. Even in that moment, walking through the aisles of Home Depot with these items in her hands, McClintic knew what they were for. They headed out of the city, into rural areas where houses became sparse and roads narrowed into dirt lanes. McClintic testified that as they turned down one of these isolated laneways, Rafferty began pleasuring himself. The depravity of that detail, the casual nature of it, the complete lack of humanity, speaks to who Michael Rafferty truly was. Eventually, they stopped. McClintic left the vehicle because, she said, she knew what was going to happen. "I believed he was going to grape Tori," McClintic testified. She turned away, but she could hear screaming. She could hear voices. When she looked back, Tori was on Rafferty's lap wearing only a shirt. According to McClintic's testimony, and this is where her story shifted over time, she was the one who delivered the fatal blows. Initially, in her first statements to police, McClintic claimed it was Rafferty who had unalived Tori. But by the time she testified at Rafferty's trial, her story had changed. She insisted that she placed a garbage bag over Tori's head and struck the little girl several times with a hammer. She also said she kicked Tori before hitting her with the hammer. The forensic pathologist would later testify that determining who inflicted the blows was beyond the scope of medical evidence. What was clear from the autopsy was that Tori died from multiple blunt force trauma to the head. An 8-year-old child was beaten to death, suffered unimaginable terror and pain in her final moments, and died far from home, far from anyone who loved her. McClintic and Rafferty then moved Tori's body to the base of a pine tree near a rock pile and covered her with stones. They drove away, leaving her there in that isolated field. And then, in a detail that perhaps best illustrates the complete moral bankruptcy of both individuals, their relationship didn't end after Tori's death. In fact, it seemed to strengthen. Phone records showed they were in constant communication, and when McClintic was arrested 4 days after the murder on an unrelated matter, Rafferty visited her at the detention center twice, greeting her with lingering hugs, flexing his biceps for her, asking if he could bring her flowers. Michael Thomas Christopher Stephen Rafferty was a predator hiding in plain sight. To the women he dated, and there were many of them, he presented himself as a dance teacher and a contractor. He was constantly on his BlackBerry, juggling conversations with up to 7 or possibly more women at once. Using his phone to schedule lessons and jobs that didn't exist. He betrayed a neediness and desperation in his messages, begging some of the women to return his calls even after they said they weren't interested. But beneath this facade of a charming, if somewhat clingy boyfriend, there was something far more sinister. According to the Crown's case at trial, 13 women who had been involved with Rafferty at various points reported that he had a penchant for choking them during intimate encounters. Some of these women said they consented to this, others said they did not. Rafferty even had one woman he had just met sign a consent note before they engaged in intimate activity, a document that read, "I agree to what Mike and I are doing tonight, sensual choking and passing out and other things." Evidence suggests that most of the women Rafferty choked ended the relationship shortly thereafter. Terri-Lynne McClintic didn't. The most damning evidence against Rafferty, however, never made it to the jury, a decision that remains controversial to this day. An exhaustive search of Rafferty's laptop and the hard drive of an old computer from several years prior to Tori's death revealed interests that painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. Police found that Rafferty had downloaded or viewed a substantial amount of child porn on his computers, and the vast majority of the file names suggested a focus on fictional family scenarios. In the weeks leading up to Tori's unaliving, search queries on his computer included terms like real underage grape pictures and explicit searches for content involving minors. He had also searched for best program to download child porn. The laptop contained videos with what prosecutors described as a disturbing instructional purpose, including several that depicted extreme violence. There were also Hollywood movies dramatizing child abductions. Rafferty's search history revealed interests in various extreme activities, from golden showers to necrophilia and other disturbing content. So why didn't the jury hear about any of this? In a pretrial ruling issued on January 31, 2012, Justice Thomas Heaney made a decision that would become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire case. The judge ruled that while police had acted legally in obtaining search warrants for Rafferty's home and car, and while they honestly believed those warrants were sufficient to allow for a forensic examination of the hard drive, BlackBerry, and laptop found within, the police should have anticipated how the law might change and sought another warrant to examine the devices themselves. In essence, Justice Heaney said the police were good cops but bad lawyers. As a remedy for what he called their carelessness, the judge deemed the search a violation of Rafferty's charter-guaranteed right against unreasonable search and seizure, and he threw the evidence out. The ruling meant that the jury would never know about the child porn, the disturbing searches, the videos with instructional purposes. They would never know the full extent of Michael Rafferty's depravity. As one columnist later wrote, the system hadn't trusted them with the considerable volume of information there was about the stolid man in the prisoner's box. They weren't smart like lawyers or judges. They were merely the triers of the facts. Terri-Lynne McClintic's trial came first. In April 2010, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. There was no lengthy trial, no drawn-out legal battle. She admitted what she had done, and she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Before her sentencing, victim impact statements were read in court, raw, devastating testimonies from Tori's family about what they had lost. Tara McDonald's statement was almost unbearable to hear. "It has been just over a year since the loss of my baby, and I have tried many times to put to words how this has impacted my life," she wrote. "My life will never be the same without Victoria. I think of her every single day, and the pain never gets any easier to accept in my heart. I miss her so much that many times, if I didn't have my son, I probably would have taken my own life, because the agony of not having her here with me is so great." She described the nightmares, the insomnia, the feeling of being trapped in a waking nightmare. "My heart, mind, body, and soul feel like I will never, ever find peace or closure. A piece of me will be missing for the rest of my entire lifetime. Tori had been her best friend in the entire world," she said. "I can't begin to describe all of the emotions that affect me daily. I don't think that anyone can ever understand how the loss of a child impacts a person's life." Tori Stafford's statement, written by a child still trying to process the unprocessable, was equally heartbreaking. "Tori was the most important person in the world to me," he wrote. "And the worst part about losing her, which has more reasons than one, is I don't ever get to see her again. I lost my only sibling. She was the closest person to me. Me and Tori could barely be apart for a weekend, let alone a lifetime." He described the guilt that consumed him. "Just knowing that I never get to see her again makes me sad. I would have given anything, and I still would give anything to get my baby sister back. I just love her more than anything. I have lost a lot of sleep. There's nights I lie with my mom crying because I miss Tori. Also, I don't like going places by myself or going into stores myself because it scares me." Rodney Stafford's statement captured the helplessness of being unable to protect his children from this horror. Watching his son try to process this grief was, in some ways, even more painful than his own. He tries well to hide it, but you can see the emptiness. He misses his sister and feels guilty every day because he never walked her home. "It kills me inside to see him cry, and for me to know that the one thing he wants now in life, that could make him happy and put that smile back on his face, I can never give to him. I can never bring Victoria home to see Darren, or to see anyone for that matter." In a moment of almost incomprehensible grace, Rodney addressed McClintic directly. "Over the course of the last year, I have been forced to have feelings of hurt, anger, and worst of all, hate, towards you. All feelings I have never felt towards someone before, and they are all a direct result of what happened to Victoria. As hard as this is for me, I do have to say thank you to you." He was thanking her for cooperating with police, for helping them find Tori's body, for giving the family at least that small measure of closure. Michael Rafferty's trial began in March 2012 in London, Ontario. The trial had been moved from Woodstock because of concerns that finding an impartial jury in Tori's hometown would be impossible. For 10 weeks, the courtroom became a theater of horrors as the details of what happened to Tori were laid out piece by piece. Rafferty, then 31 years old, pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, sensual assault causing bodily harm, and abduction. His defense strategy was essentially to blame everything on McClintic, to paint her as the sole perpetrator and himself as an unwilling accomplice at best. The Crown's star witness was, of course, Terri-Lynne McClintic herself. On March 12, 2012, she took the stand and told the jury about Tori's final hours. She described luring the little girl with the promise of seeing a puppy, pushing her into Rafferty's car, the drive to Guelph, the stop at Home Depot, the isolated laneway. She testified about hearing Tori's screams, about seeing the little girl on Rafferty's lap. And she admitted, in a reversal from her earlier statements, that she was the one who struck the fatal blows with the hammer. Her testimony was graphic, disturbing, and at times contradictory. Defense attorney Dirk Durstein hammered away at those contradictions, trying to undermine her credibility. Why had her story changed? Which version was the truth? How could the jury trust anything she? But the physical evidence supported much of McClintic's account. Forensic analysis of Rafferty's car revealed Tori's DNA. A blood sample collected from the Honda Civic almost certainly came from Tori, and DNA found in a gym bag inside the car likely came from Tori, Rafferty, and one other individual. A mixture of blood and semen was found on the back of the front passenger seat. The cell phone tower data placed Rafferty's phone in the Mount Forest area on the evening of April 8. Surveillance footage showed his car near Oliver Stevens' school at the time of the abduction. The hammer and garbage bags were traced back to the Guelph Home Depot. Throughout the trial, Tara McDonald and Rodney Stafford sat in the courtroom every single day, though they sat in different sections, their estrangement a painful reminder that grief doesn't always bring people together. They forced themselves to listen to every detail of their daughter's final hours, every description of her suffering. Victim advocate Jonathan Rudin, who has worked with families of crime victims, explained the unique torture of this position. They were not able to be with their child when it was important to protect them, so not being in the courtroom in solidarity with them is unthinkable. If they're not there, they feel like they've abandoned their child. Rafferty himself never testified. The only time the jury heard his voice was when he pleaded not guilty and in a brief audio interview with police shortly after he first appeared on their radar. He sat in the prisoner's box day after day, his face impassive, offering no explanation, no defense, no acknowledgement of the horror he had caused. The trial took a severe emotional toll on everyone involved. The details were so disturbing, so graphic that one juror later sued the Ontario government, claiming she developed post-traumatic stress disorder from serving on the jury. The images, the testimony, the knowledge of what had been done to an 8-year-old child, it was the kind of thing that burrowed into your mind and stayed there, poisoning everything. On May 11, 2012, after deliberating for about 13 hours, the jury returned with their verdict. Michael Rafferty was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sensual assault causing bodily harm. The courtroom erupted in emotion, relief, grief, rage, all tangled together. Outside the courthouse, Rodney Stafford spoke to the media, holding up a photograph of his daughter. He wanted people to remember Tori, to know her name, to understand the dangers that children face. On May 14, 2012, Rafferty was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Justice Heaney, delivering the sentence, said that Rafferty's crimes were especially cruel because he had been the person who should have been protecting Tori, not harming her. "You have snuffed out the life of a beautiful, talented, vivacious little girl, a tomboy diva in the trustful innocence of childhood," the judge said. But in a final act of cowardice and disrespect, Rafferty chose not to attend his own sentencing. He remained in the holding cells beneath the courthouse, refusing to face Tori's family as they delivered their victim impact statements, refusing to hear about the devastation he had caused. The gesture spoke volumes about who Michael Rafferty was, a man so lacking in basic humanity that he couldn't even summon the minimal courage it would take to sit in a courtroom and accept responsibility for his actions. Rafferty later attempted to appeal his conviction. In October 2016, his case was argued before the Ontario Court of Appeal, where his lawyers tried to shift the blame entirely onto McClintic. The appeal was dismissed the same day, with the judges writing that there was no air of reality to Rafferty's claim that he was merely an accomplice to a murder carried out solely by McClintic. The evidence was overwhelming. This was his plan, his car, his depravity that drove the crime. The impact of Tori's murder rippled far beyond her immediate family. Woodstock, Ontario, the friendly city where neighbors knew each other and children walked home from school, would never be quite the same. The case became part of the town's identity, a dark shadow that residents couldn't escape. In the years following Tori's death, Woodstock experienced a troubling spike in youth mental health crises. In the spring of 2016, 5 young people took their own lives within just 4 months, a stark contrast to the previous year when there had been no youth murder incidents. Students from 5 local schools organized a walkout to raise awareness about the alarming number of attempts. It's impossible to draw a direct causal line between Tori's murder and these later tragedies, but community members acknowledged that the loss of innocence, the collective trauma, had left scars. Melanie Burns, a local mother and founder of a youth prevention Facebook group, explained, "While these incidents certainly brought us into the headlines, they don't encapsulate who we are." The community rallied, organizing mental health conferences, sharing resources, trying to rebuild what had been broken. Stephen and Jennifer Hall, who moved to Woodstock in late 2015 from Northern Ontario, found a community still trying to heal. "People are incredibly kind," Stephen remarked. "It's as if they are driven by an innate sense of kindness. Perhaps that kindness was, in part, a conscious decision to push back against the darkness, to not let what happened to Tori define everything about who they were as a community." Even after convictions and sentences, the Tori Stafford case refused to fade from public consciousness. In September 2018, nearly a decade after Tori's death, a new controversy erupted. Terri-Lynne McClintic had been transferred from a medium-security prison to an Indigenous healing lodge in Saskatchewan. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. A healing lodge is a very different environment from a traditional prison. It's designed to provide culturally appropriate programming for Indigenous offenders in a setting that emphasizes healing and rehabilitation rather than punishment. Critics argued that someone who had brutally killed an 8-year-old child didn't deserve such accommodations, that this was an insult to Tori's memory and to her grieving family. On Parliament Hill, a rally attracted hundreds of protesters calling for McClintic's return to prison. Signs reading, "Send her back," and "Life means life," were held aloft by angry citizens who felt that justice was being undermined. In Woodstock, Tori's hometown, another rally drew community members who wanted to show solidarity with the Stafford family. Rodney Stafford, who had become a tireless advocate for victims' rights, was particularly vocal. The family felt blindsided by the transfer, hurt that they hadn't been notified in advance, angry that the person who had killed their daughter was being treated, in their view, too leniently. The controversy led to broader discussions about corrections policy in Canada. Should someone convicted of first-degree murder of a child ever be eligible for transfer to a healing lodge? How do we balance indigenous rights and culturally appropriate rehabilitation with the needs of victims' families and public safety? These were complex questions without easy answers, but they played out in a very public, very emotional way. Eventually, under intense political and public pressure, Correctional Service Canada transferred McClintic back to a traditional prison facility. She was initially moved to the maximum security Edmonton Institution for Women, and later to Grand Valley Institution for Women near Kitchener. But the damage was done. The Stafford family had been re-traumatized, forced to relive their nightmare in the media spotlight all over again. Michael Rafferty, meanwhile, also became the subject of prison transfer controversies. In December 2018, it was revealed that he had been moved from a maximum security facility to a medium security one. Again, Rodney Stafford spoke out, questioning why the man who had raped and killed his daughter was being given what he perceived as preferential treatment. "These people should never see the light of day again," Rodney said in interviews. "They took everything from us. They don't deserve any comfort, any consideration." On April 8, 2019, the 10-year anniversary of Tori's abduction and killing, Rodney Stafford stood before reporters once again. A decade had passed, but the grief was still raw, still present in every word he spoke. "Time doesn't heal all wounds," he said. "You just learn to live with the pain." He talked about what it was like to mark these anniversaries, these brutal milestones that nobody should ever have to mark. Every year on July 15, he celebrated what should have been Tori's birthday. She would have been 18 in 2018, an adult, perhaps heading off to college, full of dreams and possibilities. Every year on April 8, he mourned the day she was taken from them. Every year on July 21, he remembered the day her body was found, the day hope officially died. Rodney has dedicated much of his life since Tori's death to advocacy work. He speaks at schools, at community events, anywhere people will listen, about child safety, about stranger danger, about the importance of walking children home, of knowing who they're with, of teaching them that it's okay to say no to adults. He has pushed for legislative changes, for Tori's law and other measures designed to keep violent offenders behind bars and protect potential victims. The purple ribbons that appeared across Woodstock in the weeks after Tori disappeared have become a symbol of her memory. Every year on the anniversary of her death, purple ribbons appear again, on trees, on lampposts, on front porches, a community's way of saying, "We remember, we haven't forgotten, your life mattered." Darren Stafford, Tori's brother, has grown up in the shadow of this tragedy. He's had to navigate adolescence and young adulthood while carrying the weight of survivors' guilt, the what-ifs that haunt him. What if he had walked her home that day? What if he had been there? Could he have protected her? These are questions that have no answers, guilt that serves no purpose except to cause more pain, but they're questions he can't help but ask. Tara McDonald has largely stayed out of the public eye in the years since Tori's death, processing her grief privately, trying to be there for Darren while dealing with her own shattered heart. The nightmares she described in her victim impact statement, they probably never went away. You don't get over something like this. You just survive it, one day at a time. Her journey to sobriety, which she achieved about 6 months before Rafferty's trial, became part of her attempt to honor Tori's memory by becoming the parent she wished she'd been able to be. The Tori Stafford case changed Canada in ways both tangible and intangible. It led to policy discussions about child safety, about how schools handle dismissal times, about the importance of community vigilance. Many schools across the country implemented stricter protocols about releasing children to adults who aren't parents or designated guardians. The case also sparked important conversations about how the justice system handles child victims and their families. The fact that Tara and Rodney had to sit through weeks of graphic testimony, hearing in excruciating detail what happened to their daughter, highlighted the re-traumatization that victims' families often experience in the pursuit of justice. Advocates called for reforms to make the process more humane, to provide better support for families navigating the court system. The controversy over McClintic's transfer to a healing lodge led to legislative changes affecting how and when federal inmates can be transferred to minimum security facilities or healing lodges. While these changes were criticized by some as being reactionary and driven by sensationalism rather than sound correctional policy, they reflected public sentiment that certain crimes, particularly crimes against children, warrant different consideration. Perhaps most significantly, the Tori Stafford case served as a stark reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. Michael Rafferty wasn't a monster in appearance. He was an ordinary-looking man who blended into society, who dated multiple women, who maintained a facade of normalcy. Terri-Lynne McClintic was a young woman, barely out of childhood herself, the kind of person who might have seemed non-threatening to an 8-year-old girl. The danger came not from strangers in dark alleys but from people who walked among us, who looked normal, who knew how to exploit trust and innocence. Even now, more than a decade after Tori's death, there are questions that may never be fully answered. The most persistent question centers on McClintic's changing testimony about who delivered the fatal blows. In her initial statement to police on May 19, 2009, McClintic told investigators that Rafferty was the one who struck Tori with the hammer. She maintained this version through subsequent interviews. But when she testified at Rafferty's trial in March 2012, nearly 3 years later, her account had dramatically shifted. She now insisted that she was the one who placed the garbage bag over Tori's head and delivered the fatal hammer blows. When pressed by the Crown prosecutor about this inconsistency, McClintic explained, "I lied to the police because I didn't want to believe it was me." She told the court she had minimized her own role because accepting the full weight of what she'd done was too much to bear. Based on what we know about the psychology of violent offenders and the dynamics of abusive relationships, this explanation could hold water. Perpetrators often struggle with cognitive dissonance and may initially deflect blame before eventually accepting responsibility. However, it's also possible that McClintic changed her story to protect Rafferty, or conversely, to ensure his conviction by taking full responsibility herself. The forensic evidence couldn't definitively resolve this question. Dr. Michael Pollinen, Ontario's chief forensic pathologist, testified that determining who wielded the hammer was beyond the scope of medical evidence. What the autopsy could confirm was that Tori died from multiple impacts of blunt force to the head. The pattern and severity of injuries suggested repeated blows from someone in a position of control over the victim. Most investigators and legal experts agree that regardless of who physically struck the blows, both McClintic and Rafferty were equally culpable in Tori's death. They planned it together, carried it out together, and concealed it. Another haunting question concerns the sensual assault. While Rafferty was convicted of sensual assault causing bodily harm, the forensic evidence regarding this charge was complicated by the state of Tori's remains. Dr. Pollinen testified that Tori's body was too badly decomposed after more than 3 months to determine conclusively whether a sensual assault had occurred. However, the prosecution presented other evidence to support this charge. McClintic's testimony about what she witnessed, the mixture of blood and semen found in Rafferty's car, and the pattern of events she described. Based on the totality of evidence, the jury determined beyond reasonable doubt that the assault had occurred, even without definitive forensic confirmation. What role did drugs play in the crime? McClintic admitted to using substances heavily around the time of the abduction. Court evidence showed she was consuming cocaine, ecstasy, morphine, and OxyContin throughout this period. But she was clearly lucid enough to plan, to execute, to try to cover up what they had done. The drugs may have lowered inhibitions, may have made the unthinkable seem more possible, but they don't explain the core depravity required to do what was done. Most forensic psychologists would agree that while substance abuse can facilitate violence, it doesn't create violent impulses in people who don't already have them. It simply removes the inhibitions that normally keep those impulses in check. How many potential victims did Rafferty have before Tori? The child porn on his computer, the disturbing searches, the violent content. These suggest someone who had been building toward this for a long time. The Google searches dated back years before Tori's death, and the pattern of escalation was clear. Was Tori his first victim, or had there been others who were too afraid to come forward, or whose bodies were never found? These are questions that keep investigators awake at night, haunting possibilities that we may never have answers to. And perhaps the most painful question of all, could Tori have been saved? If the witness who saw her walking with McClintic had intervened, if someone at the retirement home parking lot had noticed something wrong, if the person at the coffee shop where they stopped had looked in the back seat, would it have made a difference? Or was Tori's fate sealed the moment McClintic approached her with that lie about a puppy? We can never know for certain, but what we can say is that small acts of vigilance, of trusting our instincts when something feels off, can sometimes make all the difference. In the aftermath of Tori's murder, parents across Canada had difficult conversations with their children. The classic warnings about stranger danger suddenly felt inadequate. After all, Tori hadn't been taken by a scary-looking stranger in a dark van. She'd been approached by a young woman in broad daylight, someone who seemed friendly, who talked about a cute puppy. How do you teach children to recognize danger when danger wears such a familiar face? Child safety experts emphasize that the conversation needs to go deeper than simple rules. Children need to understand bodily autonomy, the concept that their bodies belong to them, and that they have the right to say no to adults. They need to know that it's okay to be rude if someone makes them uncomfortable, that their safety is more important than politeness. They need to understand that real emergencies involving children don't require other children's help, that if an adult genuinely needs assistance, they'll ask another adult, not an 8-year-old. Parents learned to establish clearer protocols about pickups and drop-offs. Code words became common, secret phrases that only family members knew, so children could verify that someone was truly sent by their parents. Walking buddies became non-negotiable, the rule that Darren and Tori had followed until that one fateful day when circumstances pulled them apart. Schools implemented stricter dismissal procedures. Many began requiring parents or designated adults to physically pick up younger children rather than allowing them to walk home alone. While some criticized these measures as overprotective, as creating a generation of fearful children, others argued that in a world where people like Michael Rafferty and Terri-Lynne McClintic exist, vigilance isn't paranoia, it's necessity. The reality is that cases like Tori's are statistically rare. Most children will never encounter such danger. But statistics offer no comfort to the families who fall on the wrong side of the numbers. For Tara McDonald, for Rodney Stafford, for Darren, the statistics are meaningless. Their daughter, their sister, was taken, and no amount of mathematical probability changes that fact. On June 5, 2009, nearly 2 months after Tori was last seen alive, and before her body had been found, the city of Woodstock held an emotional memorial service for the little girl. Hundreds of people packed into the Southside Church, wearing purple ribbons and carrying flowers. The service was a testament to how deeply Tori's disappearance had affected the community, how completely her story had woven itself into the fabric of the town. Family members spoke about the bright, energetic child they loved. Friends shared memories of her infectious laugh, her love of purple and Hannah Montana and her big brother. There were tears, so many tears, but there was also a determination not to let grief be the only legacy of Tori's short life. The community committed to remembering her joy, her spirit, her potential, all the things that were stolen from her. After Tori's remains were found in July, there was another service, a funeral this time, with the finality that comes with burying a child. But the first memorial, held when hope was fading but not yet extinguished, captured something raw and powerful about the collective grief of a community that had lost one of its own. In the years since, various memorials and tributes have emerged. Rodney Stafford embarked on a cross-country bike ride to honor his daughter's memory, cycling from Woodstock to Edmonton, a journey meant to raise awareness about child safety and keep Tori's name alive. The physical challenge of the ride, the miles of pavement passing beneath his wheels, gave Rodney a way to channel his grief into something tangible, something purposeful. Each year on the anniversary of Tori's death, purple ribbons bloom across Woodstock like flowers in a memorial garden. They're tied to trees, lampposts, fences, anywhere visible, each one a small declaration. We remember, we haven't forgotten. Your life mattered. For some families affected by tragedy, there's a fear that the world will move on, that their loved one will become just another statistic, another name in a long list of victims. But Tori's community has worked hard to ensure that doesn't happen. For Rodney Stafford, the fight didn't end with the convictions of McClintic and Rafferty. In many ways, that was just the beginning of a different kind of battle, one fought in the public arena, in Parliament, in the media, for victims' rights and justice system reform. When McClintic was transferred to the Healing Lodge in 2018, Rodney felt betrayed by a system that seemed more concerned with the rights of criminals than with the pain of victims. He spoke out forcefully, appearing on television programs, giving interviews to newspapers, using his platform to advocate for change. His pain was palpable, his anger justified, and the public responded. The controversy resulted in Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale ordering a review of transfer practices to healing lodges. McClintic was returned to a traditional prison facility, first to the maximum security Edmonton Institution for Women, and later to Grand Valley Institution for Women near Kitchener. But the victory felt hollow. Rodney and his family had been put through the trauma all over again, forced to relive the worst moments of their lives in order to fight for what they believed was right. Then, in December 2018, came the revelation about Rafferty's transfer from maximum to medium security. Rodney learned about it not from Correctional Service Canada directly, but almost by accident, and he was livid. According to correspondence from CSC, the transfer had occurred in March 2018, during a period when Rodney was supposedly unreachable by officials. But Rodney disputed this characterization. He felt that CSC had failed in its responsibility to keep victims' families informed about significant changes in offenders' custody status. It has come to my knowledge as of today that Michael Rafferty, the man responsible for all actions the day of April 8, 2009, the abduction, brutal rape, murder and concealing of evidence, was transferred from his maximum security facility to a medium security facility in March, Rodney wrote in a Facebook post. His use of social media to bring attention to these issues demonstrated how victims' families have had to become their own advocates, using whatever platforms available to them to ensure their voices are heard. As of the most recent information available, both Michael Rafferty and Terri-Lynne McClintic remain incarcerated, serving their life sentences. Rafferty is at La Macaza Institution, a medium security facility in Quebec. McClintic is at Grand Valley Institution for Women near Kitchener, Ontario. Both will be eligible to apply for parole after serving 25 years of their sentences. For Rafferty, that means he could apply for parole in 2034. For McClintic, it would be 2035. Whether either of them will actually be granted parole is another question entirely. Given the nature of their crimes and the public outcry that has surrounded their case, it seems unlikely that parole boards would look favorably on early release. But the very possibility, the idea that these two individuals might someday walk free, is something that Tori's family has to live with. Every 25 years from now, if Rafferty and McClintic are still alive, there will be parole hearings. Rodney Stafford will be in his 60s when Rafferty becomes eligible. He may have to stand before a parole board and explain, once again, why the person who raped and unalived his daughter shouldn't be released. It's a prospect that adds insult to injury, a reminder that for victims' families, there is no such thing as true closure. In the end, what remains of Victoria Elizabeth Marie Stafford is memory. The memories her family holds close of her laugh, her smile, her love of purple and Hannah Montana and her big brother. The memories of a community that watched one of their own children vanish and came together in grief and solidarity. The memory of injustice that drives continued advocacy for child safety and victims' rights. Tori was 8 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her, birthdays and holidays, first crushes and graduation days, career choices and travels, maybe children of her own someday. All of that was stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. She deserved so much better than the hand she was dealt. The Never Forget movement that emerged in the aftermath of her unaliving isn't just about remembering Tori Stafford the victim. It's about remembering Tori Stafford the child, the little girl who loved her brother, who was excited to walk home by herself for the first time, who trusted a young woman who talked about a cute puppy. It's about ensuring that her death, as horrific and senseless as it was, serves as a catalyst for change, for better protection of children, for more support for victims' families, for a justice system that truly balances the rights of offenders with the rights of those they've harmed. Every April 8, purple ribbons bloom across Woodstock like flowers in a memorial garden. They're a promise, a commitment. We remember. We haven't forgotten. Your life mattered, and we will keep fighting to make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to another child. Tori Stafford was here. She lived, she laughed, she loved her family and was loved in return. She was real, not just a news story or a true crime case. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had favorite colors and favorite songs and dreams for her future. And she is gone, taken from this world far too soon by people who should have protected her innocence, not exploited it. That is the unbearable truth that Tara McDonald, Rodney Stafford, Darren Stafford, and everyone who loved Tori must carry with them every single day. But in the midst of that unbearable truth, there is also this. Tori's story has made parents more vigilant, has prompted difficult but necessary conversations about child safety, has led to policy changes that may protect future children. Her death was not in vain if it prevents even one other family from experiencing this nightmare. That's cold comfort for those who loved her. No amount of policy change or increased awareness can bring Tori back, but it's something. In a world that can feel random and cruel and fundamentally unjust, it's a small light in the darkness. And sometimes, when grief threatens to swallow everything, small lights are enough to keep going. Victoria Tori Stafford, July 15, 2000 to April 8, 2009. Gone but never ever forgotten.